Perception. Signal detection theory. Detection theory or signal detection theory is a means to quantify the ability to discern between signal and noise. According to the theory, there are a number of psychological determiners of how we will detect a signal and where our threshold levels will be. The factors that affect threshold include experience, expectations, and physiological state. For example, fatigue, etc. For instance, a soldier in wartime will likely detect fainter stimuli than the same soldier in peacetime. According to Tanner and Sweet 1954, signal detection theory has developed into one of the most dominant influence in psychophysics just after a few years of its application. To apply signal detection theory to a data set where stimuli were either present or absent and the observer categorized each trial as having the stimulus present or absent, the trials are sorted into one of the four categories. Stimulus present, respond absent. In stimulus present is miss, and respond present in stimulus present is hit. Stimulus absent and respond absent is correct rejection. Stimulus absent and respond present is false alarm. Sensitivity versus response criterion. Sensitivity refers to how hard or easy it is to detect that a target stimuli is present from backward events. The assumption in this criterion is that although the physical stimuli in this situation, the noise n and the signal plus noise Sn are nominally constant, the sensory effects vary from presentation to presentation in a way that is adequately represented by the normal distribution. Most commonly used statistics for computing sensitivity is sensitivity index. In response criterion, a particular magnitude of central neural effect is selected by S, who then responds signal whenever the central neural effect equals or exceeds the criteria, and no signal whenever it is less. Bias is the extent to which one response is more probable than another. It means that a receiver may be more likely to respond to a stimulus respond that a stimulus is present, or more likely to respond that a stimulus is not present. Four possible outcomes: response of stimulus, noise, in signal is hit, S by Sn is equal to number of hits upon number of Sn trials, and no noise in Sn is false alarm, n by Sn is equal to number of false rejection upon number of Sn trials, n in S signal is false alarm, S by Sn is equal to number of false alarm upon number of n trials. Correct rejection, n by Sn is equal to number of correct rejection upon number of n trials. An example from everyday life illustrates this point. Suppose a mother is expecting her son visit from abroad after so many years, which she had awaited since so long. As time goes on, the mother begins to hear the son's footsteps and may open the door only to find that nobody is there. The mother is detecting a stimulus or signal that is not there. Because she is in hurry and is excited to meet her son, which she don't want to miss, and thus check again and again to see if the son is there, only to find that the son has not yet arrived. Subliminal perception occurs whenever stimuli presented below the threshold or limits for awareness are found to influence thoughts, feelings, or actions. The term subliminal perception was originally used to describe situations in which weak stimuli are perceived without awareness. Subliminal perception has been demonstrated in controlled laboratory studies by showing that stimuli can be perceived even when they are presented under conditions that make it difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish one stimulus from another stimulus. The classic studies were conducted in the 1970s by the British psychologist Anthony Marshall. These experiments were based on previous findings, indicating that a decision regarding a stimulus is facilitated or primed when the stimulus follows a related stimulus. For example, if an observer is asked to classify a letter string as either a word, for example table, or a non-word, for example Rothem letter string, such as the word mother, will be classified as a word faster when it follows a semantically related words, for example, father, than when it follows a semantically non-related words, for example, chair. Examples of subliminal perception are found in studies of patients with neurological damage in a syndrome called blind sight. Patients with blind sight have damage to the primary visual cortex. As a result of this damage, they are often unaware of perceiving stimuli within a restricted area of their visual field. For example, if the visual field is thought of as consisting of four quadrants, a blind sight patient may have normal vision for stimuli presented in three of the quadrants, but be completely unaware of stimuli presented in the fourth quadrant. However, even though these patients may claim not to see stimuli located within the blind quadrant, they are still able to guess the size, shape, or orientation of the stimuli that they claim not to see. Another neurological syndrome in which subliminal perception occurs is prosopagnosia or face agnosia. Subliminal perceptions has great practical importance in advertising. James Vickery, 1957, a market researcher, claimed that over a 6-week period, 45,699 patrons at a movie theater in Fort Lee, New Jersey, were shown two advertising messages: eat popcorn and drink Coca Cola, and were flashed for 3 by 1000 of a second one every 5 seconds while they watched the film Picnic. Despite the fact that the customer were not aware of perceiving the messages, Vickery claimed that over the 6-week period, the sales of popcorn rose 57.7% and the sales of Coca Cola rose to 18.1%. Vicarious claims are often accepted as established facts. Information processing approach to perception are generally the understanding of information that plays the greatest role in psychology is due to James J. Gibson, although most psychologists are unwilling to buy into Gibson's full theory of perception 1966 to 1966 1979. They typically agree with him about what information is indeed even mad. 1982, who criticizes Gibson's approach explicitly and lays out a striking non Gibsonian view of what visual perception is, one that is the model for all cognitive science, seems to agree with Gibson's views of the nature of information. It is information processing, he says, that Gibson doesn't get. 1982. There are many others like Evans 1982, Barwise and Parry 1981, Millikan 2000, and that's K 1981 who were influenced by Gibson's view. There are two main points to Gibson's theory of perception. First, Gibson disagreed with the tradition that took the purpose of visual perception to be the internal reconstruction of the three-dimensional environment from two-dimensional inputs. Instead, the function of perception is the guidance of adaptive action. 2. Gibson 1966-1979 rejected classical views of perception in which perception results from the addition of information in the mind to physically cause sensation. This information processing way of understanding perception, Gibson thought, puts an unbridgeable gap in place between the mind where the information is added and the perception happens, and the world where the merely physical light causally interacts with the retina. Instead, Gibson argued perception is a direct, non inferential, non computational process in which information is gathered or picked up from the environment. Combine these to give rise to Gibson's most well known contribution, his theory of affordances, 1979. If perception is direct, no information is added in the mind. If perception also guides behavior, the environment must contain sufficient information for the animals to guide its behavior. In other words, the environment must contain information specifying affordances. These views place significant constraints on the theory of information that Gibson can offer. First, because it is used in non inferential perception, information must be both ubiquitous in the environment and largely unambiguous. Second, because perception also guides behavior, the information in the environment must specify opportunities for behavior, which is to say, it must specify affordances. The following are the key points of this brief description of Gibson's theory of the information available in the environment for perception. First, information for perception is not Shannon Weaver information. To ontologically speaking, information is a relation between energy in the environment, light, vibrations, etc., and the substances and surfaces in the environment. 3. Along with the substances and surfaces of the environment, the energy in the environment also contains information specifying affordances. 4. Because of 3, the information can be used by animals to guide behavior directly, that is, information about affordances can guide behavior without intervening inferences or computations. Culture and perception. The human perception is culturally influenced has long been a proposition entertained by many social scientists. The plausibility of this proposition is high based as it is upon certain contemporary philosophical and social scientific concepts such as that of cultural relativism. Cultural influences plays a vital part in perception. For example, members of the early tribal communities often develop different perceptual capacities compared to members who live in cities. Research studies on perception have shown that American children who live in cities could discriminate various geometrical design in different shades of colors. On the other hand, tribal children who live in whiteness showed a greater capacity for discrimination of different sounds and smell which appeared indistinguishable to children living in big cities. An interesting observation recorded by CM Turnbull in this connection was about the Bambuti Pygmies of Congo who rarely venture out of the forest and are therefore not used to looking at far off objects. Turnbull observed that from a distance one of the pygmies could not recognize a herd of buffaloes. On getting closer to the animals, he believed that they were getting magically larger in size. He was unable to grasp the fact that the buffaloes had actually remained constant in size. His eyes transmitted the same message to his brain as those of people who were brought up in other cultures. The only difference was in the way the pygmy interpreted the messages. The perception of the situation was different from Turnbull's. Nisbet, who argues that there is a difference between how people perceive objects and situations related to the region from which they originate. Nisbet argues that Easterners, Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese tend to think holistic, are more likely to attend to backgrounds, are more likely to expect change and group objects in thematic relations and deal with contradictions, finding truth in both the sides. On the other hand, think analytic more are more likely to attend to objects group according to taxonomies and tend to reject one side of contradictions. More recently, researchers like Barry Dyson and others have found cultural differences in perceptual skills related to the field independence dependent dimension. It was found that the more complex and differentiated the physical and social environment in which an individual grows up, the more sophisticated and field independent is that individual likely to be both in relation to the physical environment and the people. Ecological perspective on perception. For human organism, the marked up world include libraries, maps, price lists, traffic signs, etc., border posts, restaurant menus, fences. We can now retrace our formulation of the views developed by Gibson in his ecological approach to visual perception as follows. We are like multi-layered tuning forks tuned to the environment which surrounds us. We have evolved in such a way as to be attended to our environment on multiple levels, in part because we ourselves have created this world via what Levontin calls ecosystem engineering. This means that we have evolved to resonate automatically and directly not only to those features of our environment which are relevant for survival but also to new features of language, culture, of externalized memory which we ourselves have put there. Unlike Gregory and the Gestalt theorist, Gibson sees real movement as a vital part of perception. Gibson developed this theory into a general theory of visual perception which has three key ideas. First, optic array. The patterns of light reaching the eye can be thought of as an optic array containing all the visual information available at the retina. This optic array provides unambiguous information about the layout of objects in space. Two, textured gradient. As the optic array flows around you, the viewer, the textured gradient of what you perceive gives information about distance, speed, etc. This perception involves almost little or no information processing by the cognitive system. For this to happen, Gibson's theory on action or movement, two constants are important: the pole or the P point to which someone is moving and the horizon in relation to the height of the person. These invariants helps to maintain size constancy. Gibson further explained an ability to filter the optic array as the potential to filter information through resonance. This is rather like radio waves and the radio, which can pick up frequencies that broadcast music, etc. Distinguish them from other noise. People are able to tune into their environments fairly automatically. 3. Affordances. This means attaching particular meaning to visual information. Gibson rejected the theory that long-term memory provides meaning. Rather, he argued that the potential use of an object is directly perceivable. A ladder affords climbing up or down. A chair affords sitting. Styles of perception. There are numerous styles of perception. Some of the major well-known styles of perception are: first, amodal perception; 2, color perception; 3, depth perception; 4, form perception; 5, haptic perception; 6, speech perception; 7, pitch perception; 8, harmonic perception; 9, rhythmic perception. First, amodal perception. Amodal meaning without modality. Perception is perception of information that is common, redundant across multiple senses. For example, auditory, visual, tactile. Amodal information includes changes along three basic parameters of stimulation: time, space, and intensity properties of objects and events such as temporal synchrony, rhythm, tempo, duration, intensity, and co-location are common across auditory, visual, and proprioceptive stimulation. Properties such as shape, substance, and texture are common across visual and tactile stimulation. For example, the same rhythm and tempo can be detected by seeing or hearing the pianist strike the notes of the keyboard, and the same size, shape, and texture can be detected by seeing or feeling an apple. The term amodal has also been used in a different sense to refer to perception in the absence of direct information from a specific sense modality. For example, in visual perception, amodal completion describes how we perceive a unitary shape, for example, a ball, even when part of the object or shape is occluded, hidden behind another object, for example, a block. To color perception, it is the capacity of an organism to distinguish objects based on the wavelengths or frequencies of the light they reflect, emit, and transmit. An apple is perceived to be red only because the human eye can distinguish between different wavelengths. In some chromatic substances, for example pumpkin seed oil, the color hue depends not only on the spectral properties of the substance but also on its concentration and the depth or thickness. 3. Depth perception. It is the visual ability to perceive the world in three dimensions. 3D. It arises from a variety of depth cues. These are typically classified into binocular cues that require input from both eyes and monocular cues that require the input from just one eye. Monocular cues. First, interposition. In this, the stimulus at the back, which is interposed, seems to be at distance, and the stimulus in front ahead seems to be closer. 2. B. Proximal size. The size of the image on the retina decreases with the increase in the distance, thus the image formed is called proximal size. Is called proximal size image. C. Shadow and light. Every stimulus has three dimensions: length, breadth, and depth. The light falling on the stimulus is not evenly distributed due to these dimensions. The light falling on the stimulus and its shadow also work as cues for the perception of stimulus. D. Linear perspective. If two stimuli are in a form of line or cue and they are parallel to each other, then as their length increases, the distance between them decreases. These lines seem to meet at a longer distance for X railway lines. E. Aerial perspective. Due to light scattering by the atmosphere, objects that are at great distance away have lower luminance contrast and lower color saturation. The foreground has high contrast, the background has low contrast. F. Movement parallax. The relative speed of the stimuli also works as a cue for perception. For X, the trees just near the railway line, when perceived from a fast moving train, these trees at a distance seems to run comparatively with a slow speed. G. Texture gradient. The experimental study of this factor was done by Gibson 1950. For the first time, Gibson thinks that by increase in distance, the density of the surface structure appears to be changed. When the grass, flowers, etc. in a garden are observed closely, they appear to be a bit scattered, but when observed from a distance, they appear to be densely situated. Types of binocular cues. A binocular disparity. There is a distance of 2.5 inches between both the human eyes when a person pay attention on a stimulus, then two different images are formed in the two eyes. It is seen if left eye is closed and object is perceived only by the right eye, then a little more part of right side of the object is perceived. Similarly, the left eye perceives some more part of the left side. Therefore, the visual area of both eyes differs, or that both eyes have different visual areas. This difference is called difference of two axes. B. Conversion. When the stimulus is at distance from the subject, the lines of focus are parallel, but when the stimulus is close, both the focal lines of both the eyes unite with each other at the stimulus. This is known as conversion. See double images. Double images work as cue because when double images are formed, they overlap each other. The stimulus is situated at a distance in this condition, but when the images do not overlap each other, it indicates the proximity of stimulus. Fold Gestalt principles of form perception. Gestalt psychology attempts to understand psychological phenomena by viewing them as organized and structured whole rather than the sum of their constituent parts. Mostly notably, the Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kafka, who founded the Gestalt approaches to form perception, more specifically try to explain human perception of groups of objects and how we perceive parts of objects and form whole objects on the basis of these. Some of the main laws are as follows. Proximity. This law points that when we perceive a collection of objects, we will see objects close to each other as forming group. The proximity can be of time, space, or of any other type. Similarity. According to this law, the stimulus which have similarity get grouped or organized from point of view. This similarity can be of any dimension like color, brightness, quality, etc. Closure. The components of perception, if are clouded or components are grouped or organized, then they are perceived as a whole figure. Law of pregnance, figure ground. This phenomena captures the idea that in perceiving a visual field, some objects take a prominent role, the figure, while of others recede into the background, the ground. Continuation. The components of stimulus which have continuity are ground or organized due to this continuity, and they are perceived in the form of a stimulus. Symmetry. It is seen that when there is symmetry in the components of stimulus, they organize soon. 5. Haptic perception. Haptics is commonly viewed as a perceptual system mediated by two afferent subsystems, cutaneous and kinesthetic, that most typically involves active manual exploration, whereas vision and audition are recognized by providing highly precise spatial and temporal information respectively. The haptic system is especially effective at processing the material characteristics of surfaces and objects. 6. Speech perception. Speech perception is the process by which the sounds of language are heard, interpreted, and understood. In other words, speech perception (SP) is most commonly referred to the perceptual mapping from the highly variable acoustic speech signal to a linguistic representation, whether it be phonemes, diphones, syllables, or words. This is an example of categorization in that potentially discriminable speech sounds are assigned to functionally equivalent classes. Most of the research in the field of SP has focused on the speech perception has focused on the mapping from the acoustic speech signal to phonemes, the smallest linguistic unit that changes meaning within a particular language. For example, R and L as in rake versus lick, with the often implicit assumption that phoneme representations are a necessary step in the comprehension of spoken language. The transformation from acoustics to phonemes occurs so rapidly and automatically that it mostly escapes our notice. 7. Pitch perception. Where auditory communication is concerned, it was of course throughout acknowledged that in music, pitch is the most important carrier of information. However, little attention was paid to the possibility that also in ordinary life, that is in speech, communication and in auditory analysis and recognition of the huge variety of sounds imagining of sounds impinging on our ears is daily life. Pitch could be a key element. While it is apparent that in speech communication pitch might be involved far beyond that aspect, although it has been known since centuries at least that the ear segregates any complex sound into simple tones, pitches, spectral pitches. This phenomenon was more or less regarded as a kind of curiosity which was of interest only to theorists of music such as Tartini and Helmholtz.